How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boil Hobby Time. This week I thought it would be fun to paint another historical bust like I did with Yisun Shin about a month and a half ago. I've been trying to improve my mini painting skills, and practicing on these larger minis has been very helpful. And because it was Holy Week, I decided to paint someone from the biblical accounts of the crucifixion, which in this case is a 1st century Roman centurion. I found this mini from the very talented Menormos, whose pages I will link below. His historical figures and busts are absolutely beautiful. For my character, though, I wanted a spear rather than a sword, so I purchased another character from his catalog and swapped the hands myself. Pretty much the only prep that was needed before I could start painting was to put them on some painting handles. I did that by drilling some holes in places that would not be visible in the end and gluing them onto some rods. Once everything that needed to was glued onto a handle, it was time to prime. And for that, I was going to use my airbrush, which after inspection, I noticed hadn't been cleaned in a while. After loading some black acrylic primer into my nice clean airbrush, I started priming the minis. These beautifully sculpted details became even more impressive as the primer went on. The character came with a printable plinth, which is the stand that you put sculptures on, but because I switched to a spear, it would no longer fit. So I transferred the stem that came with that plinth to a Roman pillar that I sculpted for a new plinth. I primed that with flat white. After the primer, I started throwing on the base colors. I printed the mini on my resin printer, and the print came out almost perfect, with a couple small layer shifts that I only noticed after getting well into the paint job. I only noticed them once I started on the brushwork, which was after about an hour of airbrushing. The reason the airbrushing took so long is because I tried to establish the foundation of all the non-metallic metal with it. I haven't done much non-metallic metal before, and still feel pretty bad at it. But choosing a character with this many shiny surfaces was intentional so that I could get in some practice. I've been enjoying watching a lot of painting channels like Squidmar, Miniac, NJM, and others, gleaning as much information and tips and tricks about painting as I can. My default setting is to just try and figure it out myself. While sometimes eventually that works, I've found that taking wisdom and advice from other people dramatically increases the speed at which you learn. Another thing is practice. You just can't get around practice. One thing that I make the mistake of doing pretty regularly with the airbrush is to use a paint with too high of opacity and cover up all of the work that I've done establishing my layers. I did that a few times during the painting of this model, but the nice large surfaces are far more forgiving than your average wargaming figure. Another mistake I made was my lazy masking job. I should have just covered all of the red, but instead I ended up with some overspray, which I had to go back and clean up before moving on to the brushwork. And because of that, I got some red overspray on my metal. But I should be able to clean that up during the next stage, which is the brushwork. At this point, I decided to put the arms on, because I wanted to get the light angle correct for those highlights on the skin, but in retrospect, I could have waited till after the torso was done. The spear got in the way while I was painting the torso, making it a lot more difficult. But then again, Marco Frassoni might call me a coward for doing subassembly in the first place. For the last historic bust that I painted, I told the story of the figure throughout the video, because sometimes just watching painting can be a little bit boring. But for this figure, we don't have much to go off, at least not from the earliest source material. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what we know about him closer to the end of the video. Given the context of the crucifixion, it's unlikely that the Centurion mentioned would have been wearing any falera on his uniform, nor would he have been carrying a shield, or had a big crest on his helmet, for that matter. But we don't know any of those things for sure. And this guy was in such a good pose, and by far the best looking Centurion bust that I found on the internet, so I couldn't pass it up. And the Valera were very fun to paint because all of them could have been made from different metals. So it was fun to try and replicate that. Some notes that I took for myself to improve for next time would be to add a little bit more contrast and color variation on the chainmail and try and achieve a little bit more realistic leather look. After touching up some of that red overspray that made it onto my metal, on the shield I began painting the symbol that many Roman shields would have carried, which had lightning bolts, which were the sign of Jupiter, and eagle wings, which were the symbol of the Roman army. I probably should have sketched the symbol on the shield with a pencil or something before just diving right in, but the sensation of potentially ruining all my hard work is just too exhilarating. And it also turned out okay. The last element of the character was the face and the helmet, which I was most excited to tackle but also the most nervous about, because it was likely going to be the focal point of the piece and had the most complex metal surfaces. If I were to do this over again, I would definitely focus on adding more dark reflections on the front of the helmet, which I think would help it read as metal a little bit better. But I am happy with the crest, even though he probably wouldn't have been wearing it. For the face, I used the same highlight colors as I did for the skin on the arms, and then I added a little bit of blue to mimic stubble on his chin. After that, I delicately painted the whites of the eyes, and even more delicately painted the pupils. And I'm really happy with how the face turned out, but I could definitely use a little more practice on eyes. With the brush work done, it was time to clean up and prep for final assembly. I also took the Mini outside and gave it a coat of matte varnish. I then finally glued the head in place, followed by the shield, which I painted the inside of off camera. Before wrapping up the project, I gave the pillar a bit of weathering using some pigment powders, which I dusted on and activated with isopropyl alcohol. Once that was dry, I threw the Centurion in place, and after that, I called it good. If you'd like to hear the account of the Roman Centurion as recorded in the Gospel of Mark, stick around to the end of the video. Otherwise, that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, Behold, he's calling for Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine. They put it on a reed, and they gave it to him to drink, saying, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion, who stood facing him, saw that this is the way that he breathed his last, he said, Truly, this man was the Son of God. If you're curious about the rest of the story, you should go read it for yourself. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. My email is listed below.